This week, the Antiques Roadshow comes from ConFuzzled at the Birmingham Hilton Metropole, where over 2,000 fanatics of cartoons, comics, costumes and games come together to share their love of the anthropomorphic arts. Sorry about that, had a bit of interference there. Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the Antique Furry Roadshow, where we'll be looking at an array of what can be considered furry art from before there was even a furry fandom. And hopefully you'll learn something new from it. Who are we? I go by Game Popper, and one of my many hobbies includes learning and research into modern history, and fandom history in particular, where last year I did a talk on the history of the furry fandom in the UK.
Hi, and I'm Beetle or Amethyst. I love vintage animal illustrations and old school costume designs for theatre and fantasy movies. I've worked in museums, and I love the interesting little stories that are buried by time, some of which I've dug up here.
Anyone who has seen my talk last year might recall that I started off with a brief rundown of various examples of furry media from the early 20th century. This talk aims to go into that section with a lot more detail, meaning a lot more descriptions and facts. We will be going back as far as the mid-1800s and as far forward as the 1960s, although there will be adaptations and variations that will be included that are on various points of time in and around that area. With that, I will pass things on to Beetle, who will talk about various furry books and literature.
Animal characters inhabit thousands of stories from around the world, so we can only cover a porthole of them here. The fables of Aesop, a storyteller and slave from 500 BCE, have been retold and reinterpreted over the centuries. First told to and by adults to address social, political and religious themes, and later being used to educate children. The tales were first printed in English in 1484. This book cover is from the 1900s, featuring the fursuit-clad donkey from the fable The Ass in the Lion's Skin. An ass finds a lion's pelt left by hunters and decides to wear it to scare the other wildlife. He is so amused he begins to bray loudly, which a fox overhears, and he approaches the donkey and laughs. "If you had only kept your mouth shut, you might have frightened me too, but you gave yourself away with that silly bray." The moral being fine clothes may disguise, but silly words will disclose a fool. The Owl and the Pussycat, a nonsense poem written and illustrated by Edward Lear in 1871, not only featuring an anthro cat and owl, but also a ring-bearing pig and a turkey who weds the feline and feathered lovers. On the right, we have cover art for the 1969 telling of The Gingerbread Man, the tale of a sentient biscuit whose escape plan is thwarted by a wily fox. The artwork here is by illustrator and author Richard Scarry, whose books often featured anthropomorphic animals living in Busy Town. The adventures of Mole, Ratty, technically a water vole, Toad and Badger stem from bedtime stories told by Kenneth Graham to his young son. Graham, a retired Bank of England secretary, moved back to his home county of Berkshire, where he'd lived as a child. After simply messing about in boats, to quote his own book, he took to expanding the bedtime tales, mixing mysticism, adventure, morality and friendship. The first book was published in 1908. Another story with many adaptations were the Walt Disney animation in 1949, a stop-motion animated series by Cosgrove Hall Films in the mid-80s, a musical, and a live-action film in 1996, starring Terry Jones, Eric Idle and John Cleese from Monty Python's Flying Circus. Kenneth Graham also wrote The Reluctant Dragon and Bertie's Escapade, about a piggy who goes on a festive rampage. Created in 1893 by Beatrix Potter, the tale of Peter Rabbit was originally written for the ill son of a former governess. The book was first self-published in 1901 before being widely released a year later. Growing up, Potter was isolated from other children. Instead, she had numerous pets and spent holidays in Scotland and the Lake District, developing a love for landscapes, flora and fauna, which she studied and painted. In later life, she became a natural scientist and conservationist, as well as writing and illustrating her own books. Peter Rabbit is joined by Tabitha Twitchit the cat, Mrs. Tiggy Winkle the hedgehog, Mr. Todd the Sly Fox, and many other native British animals. Her stories have been adapted multiple times, from the 1971 ballet film to 1992's The World of Peter Rabbit and Friends animated anthology, a CGI series in 2012, and a live-action film starring James Corden in 2018. Written in 1865 by Lewis Carroll and often cited as the best example of the literary nonsense genre, the story is of a young girl, Alice, who falls for a rabbit hole and into the fantastical world of Wonderland, inhabited by anthropomorphic animals, plants, and even playing cards. The world of Wonderland has conquered stage shows, film, animation, art, video games, theme parks, and much more. Alice's acquaintances include the dithering white rabbit, the hookah-smoking caterpillar, and the Mad March hare, forever trapped at tea time due to his hatter friend murdering time while entertaining the Queen of Hearts. This clip is from the 1972 British musical adaptation featuring some definitely not creepy critters cavorting in the woods.
And as for you, young lady, as I said to you before, you've cried too much already.
The shedding of tears should wet your cheek, not soak you through and through. And cakes are things you put away when you've had one or two. Too much of anything can only do you harm. So may I give you this advice, straight from the palm? You've gotta know when to stop, you know, put on the brakes and take it slow. It's worth us repeating again. You've gotta know when. We all like to laugh and joke about and play those silly games where everyone pokes out their tongues and calls each other names. But keep on making faces and you'd best beware, for in the morning you might find that they're still there. You've gotta know when to stop, you know, put on the brakes and take it slow. It's worth us repeating again. You've gotta know when.
The film has an all-star cast for the time. Spike Milligan plays the Griffin, though it's hard to tell under the beak. Roy Kinnear plays the Cheshire Cat, and Bond girl Fiona Fullerton plays Alice herself. On the purposefully darker end of the spectrum is Jan Schwankmajer's Alice from 1988. The animator felt that previous adaptations were too much like fairy tales, and he felt the story should be more like an amoral dream. Utilizing bones, taxidermy, dolls, and slabs of meat animated in stop motion, his film is dark and uncompromising. Dating back to medieval France, Renard the Fox is part of a literary cycle, with his mythos being added to by various storytellers over the decades. His stories are populated by other fairy folk, including Isengrim the Wolf, Tybert or Tybalt, the Prince of Cats, Chanticleer the Cock, Baldwin the Ass, and Martin the Ape, whose son, Moneki, might have been the source of the word monkey. 1930's The Tale of the Fox is a stop-motion animation based on some of the tales. It was the 6th ever animated feature film and was released 8 months before Disney's Snow White. The film tells of how Reynard's antics and trickery cause enough complaints that King Noble the Lion, king of beasts, attempts to arrest and punish the wily fox. In the end, however, Reynard bests all his minions and is appointed royal advisor.
L'amour.
Donne-moi le tien. Ce soir au clair de lune, miaou, miaou, dans l'ivresse commune, miaou, miaou. Je veux le crier sur les toits, je n'aime que toi. Chérie, je viens rôder vers ta demeure. Ne me fais pas languir, ouvre tes bras. Chacun dans sa maison dort cette heure. Et dans la rue il n'y a plus un chat. Tu sais bien que je t'aime, miaou, miaou, mon cœur n'est pas bohème, miaou, miaou. Puisque tu sais qu'il t'appartient, donne-moi le tien. Ce soir au clair de lune, miaou, miaou, dans l'ivresse commune, miaou, miaou. Je veux le crier sur les toits, je n'aime que toi, miaou.
If the story of a sly red fox defeating a lion king is familiar, that's because Disney's Robin Hood was not technically based on the Nottingham legend, but was adapted from concepts and work already completed for their abandoned adaptation of Reynard. They deemed the fox an unsuitable choice for a hero, and the project was cancelled. Disney would attempt to use Reynard the fox again in their adaptation of Chanticleer, in which Reynard and his band of night creatures, moles, rats and vultures, attempted to take over the vain rooster's farm. The concept art of the fighting cocks shows Chanticleer fighting one of Reynard's henchmen. This film was also scrapped, as the lead was again found to be an unappealing hero.
During the Victorian era, pantomimes were one of the most popular forms of entertainment in England and the Commonwealth, largely thanks to new laws that didn't require you to have a royal patent to produce plays with spoken dialogue. Even as theatres entered the 20th century and the world was being introduced to these new technologies like film and television, pantomimes had sold out performances that could last up to 5 hours or had production values of up to £10,000, which would be over £1 million in today's money. Whilst there were pantomimes that used live animals like dogs and donkeys, if you wanted an animal which was easier to direct and entertain, you would hire an actor whose sole purpose was to dress up and pretend to be said animal. Here are some examples of feline actors who are particularly fond of productions of Dick Whittington and Puss in Boots. As for how a skin actor must perform, we can look to Albert, and I quote, "While the characterization must be exaggerated and highly coloured, as it were, at the same time it must be close to the original. It is the natural touches, the lifelike characteristics that appeal so strongly to an audience, as well as the humorous side." And it was also quite common for skin actors to actually learn from their real-life animal counterparts. Charles Laurie Jr., who was the poodle from near the start of the talk, he described his research for that very specific role. "I need hardly say that I am an entire believer in studying from life. When getting my poodle parts, I had one always with me at home, and it was from him that I learned nearly all my tricks." Oh, and being a skin actor was not a short-term career. These actors could tour internationally. Harry Gilmore, for example, he played the role of Dick Whittington's cat for over 40 years. Skin actors weren't exclusive to pantomimes either. Here's an American skin actor named Arthur Hill, who did animal roles for musicals and Broadway. He's best known for playing the lion in a 1902 production of The Wizard of Oz, which, interestingly, was very different from both the book and the better remembered 1939 film, by the fact the lion doesn't talk, nor was he cowardly. The video you see here is from a 1910 silent film that was based on the musical. It's worth noting that the credits and production information is completely lost, so film historians cannot be certain of who anyone is in the film. Although I'd like to speculate that Arthur Hill reprised his role, based on the fact that it's the same costume and the same character. The only avian skin we could find were geese, which isn't too much of a surprise considering how popular the story Mother Goose is in the pantomime world. Albert himself, out of all the animals he's impersonated over his career, which includes donkeys, dogs, parrots, baby elephants, money, horses, cows, teddy bears, and giraffe, that the golden goose is his favorite role. And here are the dogs. You might recognize the one on the left if you've ever looked up vintage furries like I once did. The actor in that photo, Fred Conquest, was a member of a rather prominent acting family, so they could be considered like the Baldwins or the Redgrays of the early 20th century. Funny enough, it was also a prominent skin acting family, since his father, George, and his brother Arthur were also skin actors themselves. Although there is one more dog that was famously portrayed by a skin actor. Nana, the Newfoundland dog in the 1904 stage play Peter Pan or the Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up. According to stage direction notes, the author J.M. Barrie originally intended for Nana to be performed by a young boy, but in the end, the role was performed by skin actor Arthur Lupino, who himself was part of a prominent actor family at the time. The video now is of another Broadway skin actor, George Ali, performing the role of Nana in the 1924 silent film adaptation of Peter Pan, which would actually be his only Hollywood performance.
Animal characters make appealing mascots of brands, and while we all know and love Tony the Tiger, there is some interesting forgotten fellows from back in the day. This dapper rooster is advertising a laundrette, hence his brilliant white coat. Created in 1904 by Robert Hardmeyer, this is an example of Sackplakat, or poster style. Originating in 1900s Germany, it is characterized by bold lettering, flat colors, and simple shapes. A circa 1800s advert for Dr. Thomas Eck-Leck Trio Oil, a cure-all for croup, coughs, and other respiratory illnesses in children. Why frogs? Perhaps they are limbering up to jump out of a sore throat. Aerial motorcycles, active from 1902 to 1970, used a stylized mechanical horse head as their mascot. The equine could be drawn as a feral horse, but sometimes he'd go bipedal to show potential buyers his wares. The Esso tiger looks a lot like a long-lost relative of Tony the Tiger. First used in Eastern Europe at the turn of the 20th century before debuting in the US after World War II. The Tiger in Your Tank slogan was first used in 1959. To advertise this fact, you could attach a novelty tiger tail to your car's petrol tank. You may even find a tail-bearing sunbeam tiger in the wild in present day. Le Ferret, a 1926 poster advertising corsets, belts, girdles and bras to make you as thin as a ferret. Translation: ladies, the ferret wishes you a good trip and recommends its products, which are on sale at all good houses. The artist is Essie. An unfortunately uncredited advert for Levi's from the 1970s. This foxy fellow is advertising Swiss fashion house PKZ, founded in 1881. This advert dates from circa 1933. Willie the Cool Penguin, mascot for Cool Cigarettes. First appearing in 1934, long before Joe Camel in 1988. Willie was used to emphasize the cooling sensation of the menthol smokes. Portrayed in various occupations in adverts, such as a doctor, soldier, chef and hunter, as seen here. Despite the adult nature of the product, Willie appeared in media aimed at kids, and was given his own comic series, TV commercials and figurines. One image of Willie, wearing a top hat and monocle, is thought to be the inspiration for the Batman villain, the Penguin. Willie lasted until the 1960s, when the Cool Company stopped using him in favour of suggesting the coolness with wintry landscapes and scenes in their images. A pair of smoking poodles from a 1951 Old Gold cigarettes advert. Smoking is not recommended for doggos. The little guy in the photo was white before the nicotine staining. Tiger cigarettes, 1950s Belgium. The Tiger Girl was portrayed by 19-year-old model Angela Say from Lithuania. The pin-up art was painted by American artist Al Moore. Angela became a sex symbol in Belgium in the 1950s and 60s. Sadly, in 1979, she was found murdered in her own home. She was found with a rope around her neck, but her autopsy revealed it was a murder disguised as a suicide. The murder was never solved. The Laughing Cow, originally trademarked in 1921 by Leon Bell as La Vache qui rit in France. Bell drew the original design of a cow with a hilarious expression by himself. Although not originally red or laughing, she evolved into the cheery red bovine with large round ear tags that looked like boxes the cheese is packaged in. All these posters are from the 1970s by unknown artists. The kitchen advert reads, "It is good at all hours of the day and night." The cycling advert reads, "The simple things are in fashion." And the Levi's, Coca-Cola and Laughing Cow mashup roughly translates as "the cheese that deserves the fame." Created in 1928 by the Star newspaper of Sheffield, Gloops was a cartoon cat and the mascot of the Gloops Club, a children's club ran by the newspaper. By 1939, over 300,000 children had joined the club, and by 1957 it had raised more than £25,000 for charity. In 1972, a costume was created by a local theatre group, and Gloops was more popular than ever, even getting to turn on the Christmas lights. In the 1980s, the daring cat went on all sorts of adventures, from skydiving to escaping a mock fire. He would tour the city in a vintage bus and entertain at fetes and parties. The feline also hosted concerts, the climax of which was the Gloops Club motto, sang as, "Smile, smile, that's the Gloopers' motto. Always happy, always gay, always smiling all the day. Never be downhearted, it isn't worth your while, so be like Gloops and smile, smile, smile." Gloops was last seen in 1995 at a VE Day celebration, but this cryptid has not been spotted since. Soft drink Cresta used a cool polar bear for their mascot in their 1970s ad campaign. Cresta the bear's attempts to be cool and suave would be overwhelmed by bouts of excitement from drinking the beverage. The slogan, "It's frothy, man," refers to the difference between Cresta and other fizzy drinks. The animated commercials were created by Richard Williams, who went on to be the animation director for Who Framed Roger Rabbit and the unfinished film The Thief and the Cobbler.
Hi, man. This is Cresta's new flavor, black currant. I wonder what's... Black currant flavor, huh? It's okay.
Cresta, now in 5 fruity flavors.
It's frothy, man.
We get our first comic strips actually from Furry art. A cartoonist from San Francisco named Jimmy Swinnerton started drawing comics called Little Bears in 1892, before changing it to Little Tigers in 1896 at the request of newspaper editor William Randolph Hearst. This would later lead to a series called Mr. Jack, which would run from 1898 to 1935. Although there have been funny cartoons in newspapers before Swinnerton, his Little Tigers are credited as being the first newspaper comic strip, as well as one of the earliest influences of the funny animal genre that led to the birth of the furry fandom. As you can see in these comics, there's a common theme of Mr. Jack pursuing women despite being married, and would often get punished in some way, usually by his wife. They were actually considered quite inappropriate as well. Eventually they had to be printed in the sports section of newspapers in the hopes that kids wouldn't read them. Meanwhile, in the UK, one of the most famous comic characters was a dog named Bonzo. His creator, George Studdy, started drawing dogs in The Sketch, a London-based magazine, from as early as 1911, but Bonzo's official introduction was in 1922. Bonzo the dog would end up being a huge icon, with plenty of merchandise as well as being the mascot of a car manufacturer, having his own stage productions and silent film shorts, as you can see here. Bonzo was notorious for being a comedic troublemaker, although there were a series of illustrations featuring Bonzo in a more sad, sympathetic light. Of course, the US had their own equivalent to Bonzo the dog with Felix the cat, who is well known as being the world's first animated cartoon animal, back when he was called Master Tom in his first animated short in 1919. Depending on who you ask, his creator was either Australian cartoonist Pat Sullivan or American animator Otto Messmer. Felix himself was a major celebrity throughout the rest of the silent film era, with plenty of his own merchandise. Remarkably, it's the clock that you see in the photo that's the most popular piece of Felix the Cat merchandise. The character has had a few unsuccessful revivals, such as a TV series and a feature-length film, but several people would buy a version of that clock with the swinging tail and the shifting eyes. Since the character is over 100 years old, Felix the Cat and his animated shorts became public domain in 2019. Then we have the three big early animation studios for contributing a large amount to the classic fairy characters. Starting off with the Fleischer brothers, who made themselves a household names with Popeye the Sailor Man and the Superman cartoons, but were popular for their focus on adult humor and darker settings, as well as the animation icon Betty Boop. Betty originally started out as an anthropomorphic French poodle, as you can see from the image on the left, but within a year she was transformed into a young and attractive flapper girl. She also had a dog named Bimbo as her boyfriend, and the pair would feature in a number of shorts together. However, in 1934, the Motion Picture Production Code, also known as the Hays Code, was enforced, and as such, Betty Boop's physical appearance was toned down and Bimbo was removed entirely, because having an anthropomorphic dog as a boyfriend is too risque. Then we have the Warner Brothers, who started an animation studio a year after the Fleischers in 1930, and like them, they also got a huge amount of success from having an appeal to adults. The most famous being the large cast of the Looney Tunes, or the Merry Melodies, like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Pepe Le Pew, Speedy Gonzales, and Sylvester the Cat, to name a few. All of these characters are credited under a number of artists and animators like Friz Freleng, Chuck Jones, and Tex Avery, amongst many others. The last name is definitely worth a mention, because he's practically the inventor of several exaggerated cartoon gags and cliches that we still see in cartoons to this day. Like how characters' eyes pop out in shock, or when they're floating in the air, howling like wolves when smitten for someone. A lot of them can be found in his most famous animated short, Red Hot Riding Hood. Finally, we cannot talk about Western animation without bringing up Walt Disney and his empire. Although making a successful beginning with a series of Alice comedies in 1923 and then followed up by Oswald the Lucky Rabbit in 1927, Disney hit their full stride when him and his lead animator Herb Iwerks created a cartoon mouse named Mickey. From that point onwards, Walt Disney Animations has produced several animated films featuring anthropomorphic characters. Along with Mickey Mouse, you have Donald Duck, Goofy, and Pluto. Not to mention Walt Disney's own adaptations of The Wind in the Willows, Winnie the Pooh, and Uncle Remus. Even after Walt Disney's passing in 1968, Walt Disney continues to produce several hit animated features, which furries continue to be influenced by to this day. Lastly, I think it's worth mentioning the influence animation from the East has had on this fandom. Japan has had its own animation dating as far back as 1917 and possibly even earlier, and it's been growing in popularity since. In the 1930s, the Japanese government provided a lot of money to early animation pioneers, especially for education and propaganda. This led to Momotaro Sacred Sailors, or Momotaro Divine Sea Warriors depending on translations, which is Japan's first full-length animated feature film in 1945. And it was sponsored by the Japanese Naval Ministry. Its effectiveness as a propaganda film is considered lacking by government officials at the time. Audiences also saw it as just more as a hopeful kid-friendly film than anything truly motivating to the cause. This film was actually released 4 months before Japan surrendered in World War II. In the 1960s, a manga artist named Osamu Tezuka became inspired by Walt Disney animated films and based his own animation style around them, with techniques to make animation quicker and cheaper to produce. Although these techniques were meant to be a temporary measure until he got hold of enough funding for bigger productions, they ended up just becoming a staple of Japanese animation as a whole, after it was used in works like The Amazing Free, Astro Boy, and later Kimba the White Lion. He's considered the father of modern anime as a result. For a number of years after his death in 1989, there was some speculation of whether he was interested in more adult-oriented art. I mean, when one of your films is about a cat woman, people can raise suspicions. These suspicions were confirmed in 2014, when a group of fans were able to open an old filing cabinet that contained concept art for various manga and anime, essays written by Tezuka himself, and over 200 pages of hand-drawn erotic transformation art, all of which dated from the 1960s and 70s. For anyone that's interested, you can look at 29 of the full set that was published in December 2016 for Sunto Monthly. And although I'm not a fan of transformation art, it's really fascinating stuff. I think it would be good to end off this roadshow with a bit of a reminder of what we mean by antique furries. It's not just about age, but quality as well. There's a lot of works of art that would fit the definition of furry art or anthropomorphic art, but a lot of it is just downright creepy. So, I think I'm going to pass it over to Beetle to explain what this last item is.
If you thought that Gloops, that crooning toothy cat, or those Wonderland animals were a little odd, to end this video, I'd like to present one of the earliest animated films. A 1933 experimental short by artist Len Lai, a singing simian advertises his wares in The Peanut Vendor.
For peanuts you will long for later on. Too late the peanut vendor will be gone, and then I am sure you will grieve sore. But the vendor must go. Peanut vendor must go. Little housewife, as the shadows start to creep, buy a bag of peanuts now before you sleep.